how do you see the Chinese reaction, the role, and especially Chinese aggression? First on concealing the information about the virus from Wuhan or not, then sending faulty medical equipments to Europe, then a clear bid to buy companies in critical sectors. In fact, Italy and Germany and France had to tweak their existing laws to stop foreign takeovers. And they've also been indulged in browbeating militarily. Taiwan, Vietnam, and now India as well. In Sikkim, what they did is somehow sending their aggression kind of a salami slicing. They've been doing it since long. So how do you see a role of the Communist Party of China during this pandemic?
Well, I must say that it's been a very, very troubling role. As you know, it's very clear that the first cases were known to the Chinese authorities by December. The first warning was only given on the 31st of December, and even then it was downplayed. And when WHO asked to send a delegation in the second week of January to see for themselves what's going on in Wuhan, the Chinese refused to give visas, saying they can take care of it themselves. As you know, it really was only towards the end of January that the Chinese began to admit they had a serious problem, when images of the major lockdown in Wuhan started coming out. And the WHO finally used the term pandemic, in fact, a good month or so after it should have been used. Now, the concern that has been expressed by critics of China, like President Trump, is that not only did China behave irresponsibly, but it coerced WHO into not taking the necessary actions to shield the rest of the world. So China is being blamed for its own mishandling and for concealing the extent of the reality from the rest of the world in such a way that unnecessary lives have been lost across the world. That is the broad critique. In addition, as you know, the Chinese have this very, shall we say, untransparent government system. It's one astonishing country where 3 months after the virus began, they quietly corrected, quote unquote, their figures for the number of deaths from the virus in Wuhan, and literally giving a double the figure than the figure they had admitted to. Sometime in late March or early April, they quietly issued a new number, which was double the official number until that date. And they can do that in China. Anywhere else in the world, it would have been a global scandal. And this is the kind of problem that the rest of the world sees with China's conduct. In the meantime, you're quite correct. What is interesting is that while they are being blamed by some, they are now boasting of their efficient handling of the virus in their home countries, which would have enabled people in other countries to protect themselves. There is indeed the way in which the Chinese have been reaching out through checkbook diplomacy, sending medical assistance, sending even doctors and nurses, as well as protective equipment and testing kits and so on, to many, many foreign countries. Indeed, in many cases, kits of dubious quality, which have turned out not to work. But in other cases, help that has been appreciated by countries publicly like Serbia and Italy, who have all praised China for the support they've got from China. And this is clearly a way for China to try and, as the American expression goes, make lemon into lemonade. They have taken what should be a negative for them and tried to convert it into a major advantage for them in global geopolitics. Now, I'm not sure this is going to work. In my own view, the opposite trend is also happening and is more visible.
Can I ask you, can I butt in? are they doing it deliberately? Are not they concerned about their image? Because the world at large, mostly, most of the nations are, anger, there is a sense of anger against Chinese aggression. Are not they concerned about their image?
Yeah, the point is that they are trying to make up for it by all these seeming acts of generosity. Which, as I said, in Italy and Serbia have been appreciated by the leaders there because they send doctors, nurses, medicines, and so on. But in other countries, there is a tremendous hostility. In fact, what I would predict would be a greater tendency to decouple from China, not just by the US, but other countries. Japan is a very good example. Yeah. They've announced a $2 billion fund to encourage Japanese companies to leave China and come back to Japan.
That's right.
And for those companies whose business model will not permit them to work in Japan, they're offering $250 million incentives to relocate to any country other than China. So there's one example, and Japan is not the only one. There are current strains in Australia's relationship with China, and China is threatening that they would not buy Australian wine and beef which are a very major Australian export to China, to a very large market for Australia. So they're also playing hardball in terms of their ability to use their economic muscle to ensure their place in the world. But the problem is that however good China is at setting the narrative, at trying to control that agenda within their own country, outside, then the image is, as you rightly said, Anurag, is quite negative. There are literally not just Donald Trump's attacks, but hundreds of memes that ordinary individuals are putting up. A lot of anti-Chinese talk is there on social media. There is a perception that this is a country that has been selling very highly curated narratives and propaganda, but that in fact, in reality, this is not a country that would be healthy for anyone to be dependent on. So in our country, our Prime Minister has talked about being Atmanirbhar. But the fact is, in every country, there has already been a rise in protectionism and nationalism. But I think you're going to find more and more individuals, companies, and governments backing away from China. I don't think that people who regularly bought items made in China will just continue doing so merely because of the price. There will be a certain aversion to purchasing Chinese products and encouraging that. As far as corporations are concerned, they will realize that the disruption of the chip supply chains that they went through at the beginning of the virus crisis is a major risk in terms of their doing business in China in future. Because don't forget, China in the last 20 years has already given us swine flu, bird flu, SARS, and COVID. So it's not as if this is a country that is, because of some of their eating habits and so on, the so-called zoonotic viruses, which climb from animals to humans and then become human to human in transmission,